So let's dive into it today. Got a few things lined up. We're going to chat about surrender, my personal experience with surrender, and a little intro to energy centers and the way that I've come to understand them. And there's all kinds of ways to understand them. So before we get into woo-woo matcha chats, we're like landing on, what do we call this? There's matcha and we talk about spirituality. So we'll see. But I wanted to give you a few tips on how to get the most out of your matcha experience if you're into matcha. So the first thing is you need like a legit whisk. I've gone through a number of whisk at this point, and sometimes these little ends fall off. So you want one that's got this like bend to it, but not too much of a bend or they pop off. And so this is one from Japan, and it's lasted me a while. And then you've got, this is not even a product promo, I'm just saying, one of these little guys will help you make this beautiful. Then my other key component of a good matcha woo-woo chat is this little guy. It's a whisk. It just sits on top of the cup. It's not a whisk. What do you call it? A strainer. There we go. Strainer. So this is number 2. Good strainer for your matcha. Makes all the difference. This is a little scoop thing. You can use it or use a spoon. And then I'm into a number of matchas and I like to try different types at different times. But this is the one that I'm into now. It's not a promo. This is just the matcha I'm drinking. And it's craft matcha from Blue Bottle. Shout out Blue Bottle. And it's really good. It's like super smooth and it's got enough of a there you go. Enough of it, like you want slight bitterness, but you don't want too much, right? And it's still smooth. So that's been my go-to matcha. So cheers. So let's talk about surrender. So first of all, when we hear a lot about surrender and spiritual wellness for good reason. And the first thing that we think about usually when we think about surrender is a giving up or a surrendering, like in the context of a battle. That tends to be where most people's minds go first. And the concept of surrendering in battle is layered with this concept of loss, which is really interesting, right? Surrender and loss tend to, in the current cultural conversation, kind of go together. But we want to challenge that a bit when we're talking about surrender in the inner experience and in the spiritual experience. So when I think of surrender, I think back to a really challenging time in my life when it wasn't even that long ago. In 2020, I got severely ill. And so ill and with so much fear, beginning of the pandemic, you can put 2 and 2 together, and so much unknown at the time, and really also cut off from the world, going through this scary experience, not being able to do things like make it to the bathroom on my own, go down a set of stairs. Like, I'm talking very incapacitated, which ultimately took me a year to get my normal physical faculties back from. So, and even after a year, it's not, it was a journey. So there was a moment during that time when I was in a very, very scary, lonely place. It was just me and my mortality. It was just me. Death was very close. If you've ever had this experience, and it sounds very dark, but I promise you, it gets lighter. When you meet this death-like energy, it's not death-like, it is a death energy. You know it when you meet it. I don't know how else to put it. For those of you that have gone through those near-death experiences, you probably know what I'm talking about. And especially if you're somebody spiritually attuned, you can feel you can feel this coming closer to you, which was, first of all, very, very interesting for me, but also obviously scary. And I knew I was in it. I knew it was karmic. We can talk about that at another time. But there was this one particular moment where I understood the concept of surrender. And it was me in bed. I was on my side. I was having an incredibly hard time breathing. I was alone. This was before I went to the hospital. And I could feel my body failing me. And I had been railing against my experience at this point for weeks and really struggling physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. So much struggle, so much, I call it swimming upstream. Like, no, I don't want to be here. How do I get out of here? What do I need to do? The scientist in me, the clinical biotech person in me was like, there's got to be an answer to this equation, and I'm going to figure it out mentally. But there are certain times in life where that's not the answer. You have to give yourself over to the nonlinear experience. And so I had this, it still gets me like amped up. I had this moment where, and I wouldn't say it was even planned, it just happened. It was a happening that I experienced where I truly surrendered. I truly gave myself over to my experience in its entirety, in the discomfort, in the pain, in the fear, in the unknown. I just surrendered. And the coolest thing happened. And I hope words will do it justice, but words can only point the way. They are not the experience. But as soon as I surrendered, I'm like that same instant surrender. And then this unbelievable spiritual experience came to me. It was healing. There was another entity there, another being that was assisting in some sort of way. My energy centers were being activated. I could feel each one of them, a different experience. And I sat there kind of frozen for a number of minutes, just experiencing my experience. And the reason I share this is because for me, it pointed to the absolute power that surrender can give you. And it almost is like a paradox, right? Surrender is a paradox because in all of the pushing, all of the struggling that I was going through internally, externally, it sounds like it reminds me of all the doing that we do in our lives. And we're like, this is the way we get from point A to point B. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's in the not doing, you're in a river and you just flow with it. You accept your moment in its entirety, in all of the stuff. And all of a sudden, you can find the current. And you have this increased ability to recognize the gifts of that moment that otherwise, had you been swimming upstream and struggling, you may not have noticed were there. I hope that makes sense. So for me personally, was a very life-changing big moment for me. And it helped me understand this concept of surrender and the power of it. Now, could I recreate that experience? We have to be careful sometimes when we have the mystical experience. Sometimes we get so attached to it. And I think mystical experiences are extremely powerful. I do not discount them. The challenge can be when you attach yourselves to them, because your spiritual awakening or experience is going to continue to evolve. It doesn't stay the same. So you have to be open to whatever other new evolution of the mystical experience is going to meet you. That helps you stay open. So I experienced it. I also had to let it go as well. But I think there was something to learn from that experience, and that's why I'm sharing with you today. So another thing that I like to think about when it comes to surrender is this visualization that one of my teachers shared all the time. And it's of this stream that starts at the top of a mountain up here, and it travels down the mountain, sometimes going away from, we'll put the ocean right here, weaving back and around, sometimes going over here, and ultimately meeting the ocean, which metaphorically we can think of as oneness, final purpose, you call that. I want to say destination, it sounds ominous, but this ultimate place that you're traveling to, that you're going to end up there regardless, but there's a certain path. And sometimes when you're on that path, it can seem like you're like, whoa, 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 I'm going away from the ocean where I'm trying to get to. And from the perspective of being in the stream, it seems like you're moving away from where you want to go. But unless you have that higher perspective, if you're looking from the sky down, you're like, oh, I see what's happening here. It looks like I'm moving away from where I want to go, but I'm really not, because it's all connected. So one way to think of surrender is, instead of paddling against the current of your life, I don't know, is this a good paddle? You can start to notice times in your life when you're paddling against the current. And so when you're paddling against the current, you're exhausted. You don't have the energy to really take advantage of where you're at in the stream. And you're probably not going to notice opportunities that are along the journey, on the riverbank, other people journeying with you, because all you're focused on is resisting the current. So a lot of times for me, when I notice there's times in my life where I'm feeling depleted, exhausted, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, I take a moment and I'm like, wait, am I trying to go back up the mountain with the flows coming down this way? Okay, let's float. Let's go with the current. Let's accept where it is that I am. This does not mean, and I had a hard time with this at first with the concept of surrender, this does not mean don't do anything. The river is always changing. The flow is always changing. It speeds up, it slows down. You reach a pool of water. So it's not saying, surrendering is not saying give up. Surrendering is saying become aware of where you're at and use your circumstances to your advantage. And sometimes maybe you're like, ooh, we're in a pool that's not really flowing too much. I have more opportunity to gain momentum on my own. And that might be a time in your life when you're like, I'm going to really go for it. I'm going to write this book. I'm inspired to, since I have the space, you've got this big pool that's opened up on your path. I'm inspired to create a course or to spend more time with my loved ones, and just maybe it's even be bored, float in the pool with not a lot of current. Discover what comes to you. One of my teachers used to say, boredom is one of the most powerful states to be in, because you become aware of so much more that otherwise the external world may distract you from. So going back to our metaphor, you're coming down the mountain all kinds of different scenarios are meeting you. And when you find that you're actually going with the flow, you're going to notice your life is moving with more ease. There's synchronicity. Things are just coming together. You're in elevated states of being more of the time. That's moving with the flow of life, as opposed to the struggle, the exhaustion, the inability. Well, not inability. Everybody has the ability. What's the word I'm looking for? Unwillingness. There we go. The unwillingness to accept where you're at. And in this acceptance, in this surrender, you can then align with your flow. And then you can start to make choices from that place. And maybe you decide to paddle in the direction of the flow and you increase your momentum. But yeah, I think we've beat this metaphor to death. It's a good one though, right? So surrender, move with the flow. If you come up on a boulder in the water, a lot of times the best ways to move through tumultuous currents is to simply relax into it. Same thing with life.